Resume. So, Deborah Grayson Riegel is a keynote speaker, executive coach, and consultant who has taught leadership communication for Wharton Business School, Duke's Fuqua Business School, and Columbia Business School's Women in Leadership program. She writes on leadership communication and presentation skills for Harvard Business Review Incorporated, Psychology Today, Forbes, and Fast Company, and has been featured in Bloomberg Business Week, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times. Wow. Deborah is the former Director of Education and Training for the Jewish Federations of North America. Her clients range from Amazon, BlackRock, and Google to JCC Association of North America, NASA, and United States Army. She is the author of Aim High and Bounce Back, a successful woman's guide to rethinking and rising up from failure. Go to Help 31 Strategies to Offer, Ask for, and Accept Help. And Overcoming Overthinking, 36 Ways to Tame Anxiety for Work, School, and Life. And you can find her online at deborahgraysonriegel.com. So she's going to provide for us a really great presentation. I'm excited to learn from you. And whenever you're ready, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So nice to see everybody here today. I'm delighted to be with you to talk with you about my latest book, Aim High and Bounce Back, A Successful Women's Guide for Rethinking and Rising Up from Failure. And I wanted to start by letting you know that I've had my own coaching, speaking, and consulting business for 22 years, which means I have had more failures than I care to admit. That is something that is absolutely core to having your own business, is dealing with the ups and downs and the cycles of being on and the cycles of being off. And so living with and learning from failure is something that has definitely been a part of my adulthood. As much as I fought it so much as a kid, I never wanted to fail. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the research behind the book and some strategies that you can use for yourself and also use with your congregants or students or anything like that. So let's get ourselves into the topic. When I say the word failure, what is the first thought that comes into your head? Please pop that in the chat box or take yourself off mute. What's the first thing you think about? Opportunity, pain, don't do it, a second chance, cringe. Yeah, what I'm really appreciating about this list here, being hit with the unknown, is the diversity of responses that we have around failure, right? So for some of us, we look at it as this incredible opportunity to learn and try something new. For some of us, we experience it as the great unknown, or something even worse than unknown, which is known and it stinks. And so I really welcome the diversity of opinions here. And one thing that we all need to keep in mind is that regardless of what the research shows, regardless of our own experiences, there will always be this diversity of opinions about failure. In general, most people don't take it as a good thing. And I'm here to say that it's not just, it's a good thing, it's a painful thing, it's a necessary thing, it's an awful thing, it's all the things. So with that being said, let me introduce you to the research behind the book. So my co-author, Fiona McCauley, and I surveyed almost 1,100 women across 60 countries. And so that means that this is not an American book. This is not a North American book. This is a book with global impact. And what we really wanted to do was understand how women experienced failure differently than men. We had some inklings about it as well. And we just wanted to sort of get to the heart of what it might be happening. And so there's a ton of research. I don't want to spend an hour on research. I want to give you a couple of highlights, and then we're going to talk about some of the mindsets and strategies. And basically, the data that we collected tells a story, and our story as women starts not in a boardroom, but in a classroom when we are still girls. So part one is really about where we start to have this really fraught relationship with failure. And the first number we're going to look at is the number 6. So, starting at age 6, girls in the classroom start to learn that brilliance belongs to others. So, boys are rewarded for their risk taking, for their bold attempts, and girls are recognized for good behavior. Like, kind of like prison, right? You think about people getting time off for good behavior. So, girls are rewarded for acting nicely, behaving nicely, being perfect and clean and well behaved. And so it's the very same classroom that boys and girls are in, but it's very different wiring, very different messaging, and very different futures. So that's the first number we have to look at, which is starting at age 6, this differentiator starts to come into play. The second thing we need to look at is what happens in the world of sports. And 43% of girls quit sports because they're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of failing. And so, what happens as a result is that girls lose the number one place where they learn to fail, where they learn to recover, and they learn to try again. And not only do girls lose this opportunity because of quitting sports, they lose the opportunity not just to fail and come back, but they lose the opportunity to talk about failure, right? So, one of the things we know is that when you play a sport, typically your stats are known, right? Think about like a baseball average, right? Your stats are known. When girls don't play sports, or quit sports, it means that they actually start to go inward about their failures and because it's not a part of a record. So that's one of the impacts that happens when girls quit sports is that we really don't learn how to fail and bounce back. And then starting at about age 13, most girls have joined social media. And social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok, these are platforms that tie our worth to satisfying others, to making others happy, to having the approval of others. And so performing for an audience for their approval becomes normal, and imperfection of any kind becomes unacceptable. So think about that for a minute. About the fact that starting at age 6, we're told behave well, right? Don't take risks, actually behave in really risk minimizing arenas. Starting at when we're teens, 43% of girls quit sports. And then we are told that you have to perform for other people's approval and failure isn't an option. So that feels like a really fraught world for girls. But wait, there's more, and it's not good news. There's more research, and part of the research that happens when we go to college and then go into the workplace is what's called the feedback problem. So, women are 1.4 times more likely to receive critical subjective feedback than men are. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. 88% of women's reviews include negative personality critiques versus 2% for men, right? Just 2% of men get negative personality critiques, while 88% of women have to withstand that. And 13% of women, only 13% of women actively promote their own achievements. And if you are um, if that is something that you recognize in yourself, you've absolutely come to the right place. That we want you to be actively articulating and advocating for yourself. And then all of this gets trickier when it comes to women of color. So this is what's known as the double jeopardy, that 40%, 6% of women of color are frequently the only person of their background in their workspace. 32% of women of color feel their work is viewed with skepticism, twice the rate of white women. And I think the statistic that really knocked us on our tuchuses was that women of color have a 0% margin for failure. So here's what it means. It means that if a woman of color is in a leadership role and she doesn't succeed in that role, it is almost coming up near 0% likelihood that a woman of color will be put in that role again. Now, with women, just women in general, we have a much lower percentage that a woman will be put in a leadership role. If a woman isn't perceived as succeeding in that role, it's not zero, but it's also a really low rate of likelihood that a woman will be put in a role after a woman has failed. So This is the bad news. After this, we're going to start talking about what we can learn, what we can learn from women, what we can learn about women, what we can learn to do about this. But I'm curious to know what really struck you in here. And please take yourself off mute. I would love to hear some voices that aren't mine.
thanks for this presentation. If I could, can I call you Deborah? Or,
Please.
yeah. I was wondering the percentage of girls that drop out of sport. Do you have the percentage of boys that drop out of sport?
I don't have that number. I know that it was significantly higher and that it tended to happen between high school and college, as opposed to when girls are younger, between 8 and 12. So I don't have the percentage, but I do know that when boys drop out of sport, it is much later in their life cycle.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other thoughts or questions? Anything that struck you about this from a personal perspective, from the perspective of a parent, a clergy, a member of society?
So it's really interesting, this double jeopardy piece, because I think I've seen it, like I've seen it happen
Yeah.
in a variety of places. And Rabbi Sandra Lawson just wrote a piece in response to the Atra Rabbinic Survey. So they did a survey of rabbis.
Mm,
There was a lot of gender differentials. There was a lot of comments on race, on LGBTQ leadership, and things like that. And Rabbi Lawson is Black and a convert to
hmm.
Judaism. And this piece about this margin for failure, like I literally was reading it yesterday. The fact that
Yeah.
there is no margin,
There is no
um,
margin.
there's just none. So to see it in other places too is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Thank you.
I'm thinking a lot about I'm entering my 19th year in the rabbinate, and I'm thinking about times when I felt this more or less and what the environment was in which I may have experienced this more or less, meaning who were the people around
Mm.
me, who were the leaders of the community, what resources had been invested into, leadership development. And so I'm just noticing that the places I felt were they may have had their challenges, but that had healthfully invested in these kinds of conversations. Maybe I felt it differently or with different colleagues, male colleagues especially.
Absolutely. So first of all, howdy neighbor. I'm in Chapel Hill.
Hi.
Hi. And one of the best worst books that I ever read, and I will explain myself, was called The Person in the Situation. And I say it's the worst best. Worst because it was the most boring book I ever read. Best because it was so eye-opening, despite the fact that it was boring, is that we don't behave in a vacuum. We behave in a situation, right? And so everything that we're going to be talking about today, because everything that we do talk about is contextual, including the point you raised of, how were my successes and how were my failures um, looked upon, regarded, helped, hindered by who I was around, what resources were available to me, what resources were available to them, because none of this happens in isolation.
And I'll just to put an exclamation a point
Yeah,
on that. It's not only like our colleagues professionally. We are also dealing often with lay leaders who have experiences outside of the congregation. And I'm thinking of a community I left after a very long time because the leadership had gone off the rails in terms of some of these things. And so I'm just noticing also like that leadership changes over a lot. But it can be super damaging, even
it
for the
can be
short amount
super
of time.
damaging. Yeah, it certainly can. It can be damaging in so many ways, including to our psyche, and our confidence and our reputations. Yeah. May I call you Michelle?
You may.
Yes, please go
Um,
ahead.
so I'm just, you asked what came up. And maybe you're going to get to this, but how much are we also part of the problem? When women are in positions of power, providing the critiques and providing the feedback, are women giving, you know, equal, like, um, are we just as guilty?
Yes, the answer is yes. So that's a quick one for me to answer because feedback is one of the topics that I've most researched of any topic that I talk about. And yes, both men and women give women this sort of negative personality critique feedback, tend to talk to women about their collaboration and teamwork and less about their leadership, tend to make the feedback less about business results. And so, yes, I say both men and women, and I'm very mindful in the language that I'm using because the research is not there to be more gender inclusive rather than binary. I wish it were, but right now, what we know is men and women. Yeah. May I call you Jessica?
Of course.
Yes, please
Um,
go ahead.
thank you. I'm wondering also about how much is by sort of generational slash and age differences, right?
Yeah.
We better than many, as much as many professions know that women's leadership has obviously changed a lot over the last couple of generations and increased, thankfully, a lot over the last couple of generations. And so I'm also curious about how it all continues to shift
Yeah.
as ideally more women are in various leadership type positions, and more public failures in many
Yeah,
cases as well.
yeah. So, a couple things about that. We did not sort our data by age. I because my co-author and I are both Gen X. Our assumption is that the majority of people, the mode, if you will, were probably within our generation of people who answered. That being said, my original co-author for this book my first choice was not my original co-author. My first choice for this book was my daughter, Sophie. So Sophie and I have written two other books together, one called Overcoming Overthinking, 36 Ways to Tame Anxiety, 36, because these are strategies that save two lives. I bet all of you will get that, 36. See what I did? And then another one called Go to Help, which is about how to get better at asking for and offering help. And I approached Sophie about this when she's 25 now, so she was 22. And I told her that I was really interested in women's relationship with failure. Would she like to write this book with me? And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, I've never failed at anything. I'm not a credible resource. And I had two thoughts. My first thought was like, ha 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 ha, that's going to be a cute story to tell one day. My second thought was, that is terrifying. For you to have lived on this planet 22 years and not know how to fail means you don't know how to bounce back. And when the failure hits you, you will have no muscles to deal with it. So I actually said to her, you're not writing this book with me, clearly, but go out and screw some stuff up so that you build some muscles, so that you build resilience and recovery because you're going to need them. She actually brought that challenge to her therapist and said, I got to screw some stuff up. And I'm happy to say that she's now 25 years old. And she's taken much bigger swings. And some of them have hit and some of them have missed. But she's now really interested in Gen Z and failure. So you can talk to her. So that's my quick answer on that. What I'd love to do is I'd love to continue the conversation about what we found. So what we found is that when people experience a failure, we tend to do one of two things. We either externalize the failure, which is an example of they didn't set me up for success, right? They didn't have my back. They didn't prepare me. Or internalize it, which is I'm a loser. I wasn't prepared. I was unskilled for this. And you get one guess which women do more.
Oh, internalize.
Oh,
Absolutely.
you nailed it. That's exactly right. And so women absolutely internalize more. So I want to share with you 12 common reactions we found about when women fail. This is what women do. And I'm going to ask you then to identify, if you are willing, which of these you see in yourself. So, dread, I make up the worst possible story about the failure. Discount, I minimize the importance of the failure lesson to learn. Direct, I change the topic to something else or make the failure about someone else. Denial, I don't consider what could be true, even in a small way, about this failure. Dissect, I scrutinize each element of the failure rather than focusing on the big picture. Depart, I walk away from the failure. Distract, I talk about other accomplishments to minimize the impact of the failure. Defy, I reject the credibility of the failure. Defend, I make excuses about the failure. Dramatize, I turn small failures into big deals or experience them as verdicts on my character. Disengage, I shut down emotionally. Dwell, I ruminate about the failure. So first of all, these all start with D because I start with D, and I do all of these. But if I had to pick, I would say that I really like, I've got a guest house with my name on it and Camp Dread and Camp Dwell. So what about you, if you are willing to share?
I was literally going to say the same too, dread and dwell. So
Okay, well, you can come stay in my guest house.
amazing. That sounds
Good.
great.
Perfect. We'll meet in Mebane.
Perfect.
All right. I see dwell. I see dwell.
Um, Hi, I'm Julie.
Hi. Hi, Julie.
I also dwell, but I also am not sure which deep slot this slots into, but I like catastrophize, like I see the failure as a verdict on my entire existence.
Dramatize. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Dramatize. Make it much bigger than it is. Yeah. Yeah. And I will share with you, so dwell and disengage and dramatize. Thank you. I will share with you that when I talk about this topic in intergenerational programs, right? So I did something at my local JCC. I've done it in lots of organizations and companies. When there is an intergenerational audience that is invited to this, it is so interesting to see the connection from mother to daughter, of where, like, if a mother dramatizes, her daughter dramatizes. If a mother directs it to something else, the daughter directs it to something else. So it's a real, like, come to Moses moment where people are recognizing that these things, whether it's nurture or nature, get passed down. And it's a really powerful intergenerational conversation about what happens when failure hits. So one of the things that we learned about failure is that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to failure. So I'm going to have you do this little thought experiment with me as if we were all sitting in a room together. I would like you to take a moment to think of something in the last 6 months that didn't turn out the way you wanted, hoped, or planned. So it could be something that happened or didn't happen, where the didn't happen was the failure. And it could be something that happened or didn't happen to you, by you, or around you of any size. So I'm going to share an example, which was I had this huge work gig planned. I was so excited. I was going to Amsterdam for one of my favorite clients. I was going to be there. I was so excited for the work. I was so excited for the play. And they emailed and said we couldn't get the budget for the event and it's not happening. So I didn't do it, but it happened to me and it felt awful. So I'm going to ask you to think of something, and you will not have to share it. It's just for you to keep in your mind. Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is we're going to go through 5 types of failure. This is part of what we talk about in the book, 5 types of failure. And I'm going to ask you to identify which category or categories your failure fell into. And many failures fall into multiple categories. That's totally normal. So let's look at the 5 kinds of failure. And the first kind of failure is a concrete failure. So a concrete failure is where the numbers don't lie and the outcome stands in sharp contrast to our hopes and expectations. Some examples of concrete failures would be not getting the promotion or the position despite your track record. The event you've been planning for months falls flat. Your carefully crafted solicitation gets rejected. All right, it happened, and it is very evident that it did not turn out the way you wanted it to. So the first kind of failure is a concrete failure. And these failures sting because the metrics are so clear and so unmet, but they're also the easiest to learn from and move past. That's assuming it doesn't fall into any other category of failure. So let's take a look at another kind of failure. This is the one. So the failure that I had was certainly concrete failure. It's not happening. But it's also circumstantial failure, which is you're blindsided or someone else created a mess and you're left cleaning it up. So examples would be working with a toxic board member who destroys your confidence. Your colleague makes decisions that tank the project. A family crisis derailed months of careful planning. So my mom is turning 80, and last fall, my brothers and I planned to fly her here to North Carolina, where I live, and that my brothers would come and surprise her, and we would all be together to celebrate her 80th. And TSA went on strike, right? I didn't do it. I mean, I'm powerful, but I'm not that powerful. But just TSA going on strike meant despite months of careful planning, nobody could come or nobody wanted to come, which was really the case. So when it comes to a circumstantial failure, you've got to recognize when failure stems from factors that are beyond your control. And in this case, we have to protect our self-worth. We've got to make really strategic decisions about what to do next. This brings us to our third kind of failure, which is a perceived failure. This is when the world calls it a failure, despite you knowing that the decision you made was the right one for you. So examples could be you're labeled quitting when actually what you're doing is protecting your sanity. You're seen as giving up, but you know that what you're doing is strategic self-preservation. Others judge your decision harshly, but you feel aligned with your values. And sometimes what looks like failure to other people is actually the brave long-term choice that aligns with your authentic self. Okay. This brings us to our fourth kind of failure, an identity failure. And boy, does this hurt. This is when you lose yourself in the process. It's not about missing the goal. It's about missing who you are. You're becoming someone you don't recognize. You're successful by every external measure, but you feel hollow inside. You've compromised your values so often that you've lost sight of what matters to you. And when this happens, we shouldn't abandon our ambitions or our goals, but we do need to listen to signals that we can align our approaches with our values and get back to ourselves. And then the fifth kind of failure is paralysis failure. So this is when fear wins before you start, when you stop yourself from trying for something big. So the promotion or the position you didn't apply for because you weren't ready yet, the innovative idea that you've been, cogitating on, but you still haven't launched it, and the conversation that you keep putting off until the right moment or the perfect moment. And when we have a paralysis failure, we've got to choose action over perfectionism, over procrastination, and over doubt. It is our opportunity to move forward even when we don't know how it will turn out. So this failure that I had, where I had this huge gig this summer that got canceled, was a concrete failure. It didn't happen. A circumstantial failure. It happened to me. It wasn't a perceived failure. It was definitely an identity failure because I see myself as a really successful entrepreneur, and to have like my big gig of the summer canceled hurt my identity. And it wasn't really a paralysis failure. I sort of dusted myself and got back up. But it was three kinds of failure, which made it really hurt. And one of the things we find in the discussions when we have women together and generations together, so mothers and daughters or mothers and sisters and that sort of thing, is how clear that a mom might have said to her daughter or might have said to her sister, that wasn't a failure that you had, but it actually was a failure. It was just a different kind of failure, different from what the person saw, right? Sometimes people, all they see is a concrete failure, but for me, it's an identity failure, and that hurts just as much, if not more. So this really gives people the language to say, no, actually, this impacted me in a really powerful way that might be different from how what you're experiencing impacted you. So as you look at these different kinds of failures, is anybody willing to share what kind of failures the example that you had in mind was? And Anne, if I may call you Anne, that is a really, really great observation that sometimes a concrete failure is an identity success. So thank you for pointing that out. And one of the things that we aim to do in this book is to really normalize failure, right? We basically say, like, if you decide it's a failure, it's a failure. Like, we're not going to make you a failure at naming failures. Anybody here recognize what kind they might be experienced? So, yep, definitely a circumstantial failure. Thank you, Rabbi Schicker. Anybody else have a category? Circumstantial. Yep. And that's so frustrating, right? We can't even say, all right, I take responsibility for this. It happened to us. I think I've done all 5. Oh, welcome to the club. I do all 5 every week, right? Pick up the pace. I do all 5 every single week. Too many paralysis failures. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the one that I'm actually most successful at overcoming. And part of that is having been an entrepreneur for 22 years. Part of that is being the 3rd generation entrepreneur in my family, that at a certain point, all I do is just go, I'm just running an experiment. I'm just running an experiment. And the one you're thinking of falls between 1 and 2. Okay. So we talked about this failure crossroads that we find ourselves at, that we're either externalizing, they didn't set me up for success, internalizing, I didn't set myself up for success. What the book and the discussion really points to is that what we want to do is catalyze, right? Rather than externalize, rather than internalize, we have this opportunity to catalyze. And I think Elie Wiesel puts that so beautifully when he writes, there are victories of the soul and spirit. Sometimes even if you lose, you win. And I love how this relates to failures, because sometimes even when we lose something, and the example that was given before, that sometimes we may have a concrete failure and the win was our identity and our integrity. And that's absolutely something that we want to keep in mind, especially if we recognize that failure is a normal, natural part of life. So here is what high-performing women do differently. This is what our research showed. They treat failure as intelligence gathering and recognize that failure is inevitable. Everybody fails, right? And everybody fails a lot. Learning from those failures is a leadership decision. And so what we want to do is we want to shift from a caution culture to a courage culture. And there are 3 shifts we want to look at. The first shift is a shift from verdict to information. And that shift is that we look at failure as data, not on a verdict of who you are. So I often think about the story of Melanie Perkins. So Melanie Perkins had an idea that she thought investors would really like, and it got rejected multiple times. So just quick question. If you had an idea that you thought your lay leaders you're like, your board would like, your community would like, how many times would you pitch your idea before you said, all right, maybe not this idea? Give me a number.
3 times.
3 times. Okay. I got a 3. I got 2 to 3. Okay. So we're looking somewhere in the 2 to 3. My son, who works for Jewish Federations of North America, was the one man in a sea of women on a giant webinar for JFNA, and he said somewhere between 1 and 0. I was so proud. Okay, so somewhere between 2 and 3. So Melanie Perkins had this idea for how to design things. And she pitched her design idea to investors and was rejected 100 times. 100. That's a 1 with 2 zeros after it. And what she found was that she hadn't really learned to articulate the pain point of people designing things. And so she did a very unsexy thing. She and her boyfriend, at age 19, she and her boyfriend moved into her mom's living room, and she kept practicing with all of this design experimentation until she could really feel the pain and then be able to articulate the pain. And eventually what she did was she took all of this failure from pitching to investors, she took all of it and said, it's not about me, it's about me being able to articulate the case. And ultimately, she got something that investors were willing to invest in. It is called Canva. How many of you have ever heard of and used Canva? Right? All of us, right? And it is now I think has 142 million users, something like that. And the reason that she was able to do it was because she was able to say, this doesn't talk about who I am. It gives me information that I can use to get better at what I'm doing. The next shift we need to make is from crisis to calibration. So I remember when I was working at Jewish Federations of North America, this was 25 years ago, and I remember walking to my office one day, and there was a Post-it note on my phone. And the Post-it note was written by my supervisor, and it had 2 words on it. And those words were, "See me." Now, I don't know how you would feel if you got a note that just said "see me," but in the 7 seconds it took me to walk to my supervisor's office, I had already told my husband in my head that I'd gotten fired. I had already let our childcare provider go because I no longer had a job. I had already reworked our entire household budget for single income because it wasn't mine anymore. And by the time I got to my boss's office with the "see me" note, I had flop sweat. I mean, I just had giant pit stains and water was pouring off my head. If anybody remembers the movie, what was it with Albert Brooks? Newsroom. Yeah, something like that. Broadcast news. Giant flop sweat. That was me. And I got there and I said, "I'm seeing you. What is it?" And she was like, "I just wanted to give you an update on the project that we're working on." And so we made 2 promises in that moment. Promise number 1 was that she would not leave me notes that said "see me" with no context. And promise number 2 was that I would not treat every note like it was a 5-alarm emergency. So one of the ways that we can manage and step into a courage culture is shifting from crisis to calibration, getting ourselves out of catastrophic thinking. And then the third shift is from shame to strategy, separating your experience of failure from your identity as a leader. And so recognizing that every single one of us will experience failure at some point, and we don't have to live in the shame with it. We can recognize that it is human and it doesn't say who I am. It is an event. It is not an identity. So we need to train ourselves to approach failure differently. So this is one of the places where my intergenerational crowds also see what got passed on from mother to daughter or across families. So the first thing, and we've already discussed it today, is catastrophic thinking. Right? So catastrophic thinking, it has 3 criteria. The first criteria of catastrophic thinking, is overestimating the likelihood of unlikely events. The second criteria is overestimating how devastating those events would be if they happened. And then the third part of catastrophic thinking is underestimating the resources we have available to deal with it. And the way that I sort of broke out of catastrophic thinking was that third part, right? I am definitely likely to assume that something terrible is going to happen. I'm likely to assume that the worst possible version of it is going to happen. But I've got awesome resources. I have a million people that I could call to help me out, and that helped break me out of catastrophic thinking. And so when we do that, we need to shift ourselves into courageous thinking and ask ourselves, what information does this give me? And treat the situation as data, not a verdict on who we are. The second shift that we need to make is from impossible standards, where anything less than perfect becomes failure. The quality mindset that once served you becomes this mental prison where we're in compare and despair territory, comparing ourselves to others and comparing ourselves to the vision we had in our head of what it should look like. What we really need to do is set up achievable standards and advocate for our own priorities and boundaries, and recognize that perfection is another form of procrastination, and procrastination is another form of perfectionism. And then finally, we want to engage in what's called analysis. We want to stop engaging in analysis paralysis, where we think that if we plan more, if we research more, if we prepare more, we will get a better outcome. What it's actually doing is keeping us from iterating. So iterating is the very thing that helps us learn. And when we don't iterate, we cannot learn from failures. And so what we need to do is aim for progress rather than perfection, and take small, deliberate moves forward that beat endless preparation. So Golda Meir tells us in her incomparable style, we don't have the luxury of being pessimists, right? We don't have the luxury of thinking that everything that could go wrong will. And so what I want to ask you is which of these three reframes really resonates for something you might need in your work and your life?
I can share.
Yeah.
I really resonated with the last thing that you said, which is shame over it was more of the iterative process that you were talking
Yes.
about because I worked most of my rabbinic career in one place in Boston that was like
Yeah.
hyper focused on process, like too much. And
Yeah.
now I work somewhere in North Carolina that doesn't process at all. And so I need somewhere like in between because I really love like, planning and all the processing and like this culture is like do it and with a little not enough like for me not enough reflection. And so but I love that concept of like reframing that as like doing things can be good if you use it as iterative process. And so I'm gonna
Yes.
bring that to my new staff that I work with, this concept of like we're doing great work. I love that we're not over processing and like how do we iterate each time? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And as I think you pointed out earlier, context matters. So I
Yeah.
did a version of this talk for the New York chapter of the American Society of Female Urologists. How's that for a name that just flows trippingly off the tongue, right? And when I'm talking with a group of surgeons, iterating isn't really an option, right? Or saying like, well, it's not so bad isn't really an option. For them, failure can mean the death of a patient, right? And so context matters. I understand the context in which I'm talking with all of you. And so when we do have the luxury of iterating, when we do have the luxury of knowing that a failure doesn't have to become our identity, we really should lean into it. Anybody else see a shift here that really resonates for you?
Can you remind me just the words for crisis to calibration? I feel like that's where I am, but
Yeah.
I've lost
Yeah.
it a little bit.
So it is shifting from, it's helping us shift from this is the worst thing, right? It's sort of the catastrophic thinking. So this is the worst thing to ever happen to me and probably even to ever happen to anyone ever. And I'm going to lose my job, my reputation, my livelihood, all of those things to saying, this is bad. This was bad. It doesn't mean the end of my job. It doesn't mean the end of my career. It doesn't mean the end of my value as a person. It doesn't mean the love I have from my family and friends is going to end. It just doesn't mean those things. Is that the one that speaks to you?
Um, in some way, yeah, less about work and I guess more in my regular life. Isn't
Yeah, well, that's okay.
that fun?
Yeah, isn't it amazing how we have failures in all our lives? Yes, in all these different parts of our lives.
Parenting. So,
For
yeah.
sure. Oh my goodness, for sure. So on Saturday, my daughter Sophie got engaged last summer, and on Saturday we're having the budget meeting with the future Machatanim. And like I just in my mind have every possible terrible scenario for how this can go. And I had to shift myself from crisis to calibration. These are lovely people. I think we have very similar values. I think we probably have very similar budgets in mind. And this is going to be an iterative process and it's going to be fine, right? It's going to be fine. So let's spend a couple of minutes at the last part of this, and then I want to leave a little time for comments and questions. 3 steps to bouncing back. And I'm going to just hit this really quickly. So the first part of the book and the talk is the research. The second part of the book is like, how do you get yourself to aim high despite fear of failure? And the third part is, okay, let's say you failed because you're human. What do you do to bounce back? And so the first step in bouncing back is called ground. And this is really where you take a breath, which I'm going to do right now. Just take a breath. No sudden movements. Chances are, if you experienced a failure, you're going to want to plow through it so that you can get out of it. But what we really need to do is grieve. We really need to recognize that it was the loss of something we wanted or expected or hoped for that didn't happen because of us, not because of us. It could be some combination of those two things, but we really need to take a moment to grieve and to notice and name neutrally how we're feeling. So one of the things that we found that women do more than men is judge themselves for how they feel. So here's what you don't hear men say. All right. And that's, of course, absolute. Here's what you hear men say less often than women. You are less likely to hear a man say, I'm so angry at myself for being so frustrated. You are less likely to hear a man say, I'm so sad that I'm so tired all the time. A man just goes, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. We judge ourselves for having our feelings. I'm so annoyed that I'm so sad. I wish it would just be over already. So we have to take a pause and breathe. We have to grieve, and we have to notice and name neutrally how we're feeling, rather than judging ourselves for it. So that's a little bite of ground. The second bite is around gather. And so gather is about, first of all, gathering your resources, recognizing that you are not doing this alone, that there are people in your life from all walks of your life that are there to help you. So I'm a huge fan and talk in the book about building something called a personal board of directors. So you all have a board of directors. This is your personal board of directors. And these are made up of people in your life who are cheerleaders, caregivers, challengers, defenders, mentors, subject matter experts, people that serve different roles in your life. So I have a personal board of directors. It's made up of 4 people, 2 women, 2 men, and many of them wear different hats. Up until a few years ago, my entire board of directors was women. And I was like, well, that's not a very diverse board. And so I brought some more diversity. Yeah, I think I have a pretty diverse board of directors. And making sure that you gather your people. You also want to gather the lessons, right? If you're going to use failure as a form of iterating, you want to make sure that you gather what you are learning from those iterations. And then one of my favorite parts in the gather part of the book is gathering your perspectives. And so there's this concept called a portfolio of selves. And a portfolio of selves is recognizing that when you have failed, one of your identities got rejected. So let's go back to this giant gig that I had this summer that got canceled. And I'm going to say that my identity as an entrepreneur got a hit, right? I was so excited for this big engagement, and my identity as a small business owner, as a speaker, as a coach, as an entrepreneur got hit. But guess what? I am not just one identity. I am not just entrepreneur Deb. I am also mom Deb. I am wife Deb. I am daughter Deb. I am probably most importantly dog mom Deb. That's my most important identification. And I just have to show you like what I'm talking about. Like, hello, I don't know if you can see that cute creature, but dog mom Deb. I am friend Deb. I am cook Deb. I am all these Debs. And so one of the things we need to do is to gather our identities and gather our perspectives and recognize that only one of your identities got rejected. The rest are still intact. And then our third is go. And go means that we go again and we experiment with the variables. So rather than changing every single variable, change one variable and iterate that way. Then test it out, change another variable and do it that way. We also want to go, we don't want to go alone. So we want to ask for help. We want to ask for help, and we want to be really mindful of when we go again, what kind of help do we need? So the last book that I wrote was about 31 kinds of help. And that's everything from, do you need somebody to empathize with you? Do you need somebody to teach you how to do something? Do you need somebody to play devil's advocate with you? Do you need somebody to just listen without judgment? Do you need somebody to send you and give you resources, right? Like what kind of help would be helpful as you go again? And then we also want to be mindful that part of going is celebrating the fact that you went, and then celebrating when you do go and it works out. So in my family, celebration looks like one thing. It doesn't matter who in my family you are getting a Carvel cake. That is how we celebrate in our family. Carvel ice cream cake for every celebration. And when this book came out, this book took almost 3 years to write. I got the loveliest Carvel ice cream cake from my daughter, who really knew how much pain and blood and sweat and tears went into this book and was so proud of me for having experimented and fiddled with the variables and made it work. And I will just wrap up before we open it up to questions. One of my favorite quotes comes from Tina Fey, who you probably know from TV and movie fame. And she says, when it comes to going, she goes, you can't be that kid standing at the top of the water slide. Eventually, you just have to go down that chute. And when it comes to thinking about that for us, we cannot be the rabbi standing on top of the water slide. We got to go down that chute. We got to go into our people, into our communities, into ourselves, and find the strength and the bravery to go again. So I'm going to stop sharing right now and would love to see from you what you're thinking, what resonated for you, who you hope this message gets to. Like, who do you think should hear this message that didn't hear this message today? Any of your thoughts are warmly welcome.
I have a question which might be a bit impolite, if I
Okay,
may.
please.
So I keep thinking about the story you told about your daughter telling
Yeah.
you that she'd never failed at anything. And I was wondering, and what went through your mind? Did you think you were a failure in that moment?
Um, did I think I was a failure in that moment? Certainly not an impolite question. I actually disagreed with her premise. It took me a little while to get there. It sort of goes back to um, the five kinds of failure. So, from a concrete perspective, this was a kid who was, a five-time All-American athlete, valedictorian of her high school, won almost every competition that she competed in. So, if you're looking only at concrete failures, she had very few concrete failures under her belt. But circumstantial, paralysis, identity, the other kinds of failures she had. And in the moment, I hadn't written the book, so I didn't know about all these different kinds of failures that count as failures. Karen, does that answer your question?
Yes, and I guess that she also didn't recognize any of
Yeah,
those as failures. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We hadn't written the book yet, so now we know so much more.
Thanks, Deb.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for asking. Other thoughts or questions or reflections? Yeah, Amy.
Um, I guess I'm thinking a lot about like things we experience in our youth that maybe that are circumstantial, like, you know, we have to move across country because our families move across country, or we have a family member who dies, or like, would you consider those within the category of circumstantial failure? Meaning, like, the death of a parent changes you and how you, like, for example, my own self, like, parent died young, right? So,
Yeah,
and that impacts like your ability. I feel like I do bounce back pretty quickly, and I'm wondering if that's
yeah,
considered a failure or how you think about those circumstantial things, because that's what a lot of
yeah.
our people are dealing with too.
Yeah, so I think about we have a really broad definition of failure, and our broad definition of failure is when something you wanted for, hoped for, or planned didn't turn out the way you wanted, hoped for, or planned.
Yep.
And I don't need anybody to adopt a definition of failure that doesn't resonate for them. But I think like that is the death of a parent is a concrete failure. They are no longer here. It is a circumstantial failure. It is possibly an identity failure. It can cause paralysis failure, right? Like I think of it as, and if the word failure doesn't resonate, it can be, it could be impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it falls into a lot of those categories.
Well, I just wonder, like, that makes me just think about how many things are failure that we are not maybe naming failure that
Yeah,
actually are the same kind of things.
that's right. And that's part of the goal in the book is that if you are willing to see like I burnt the chicken as failure and like I had to move across country for a job as failure, maybe we'll be more likely to talk about our failures and recognize how much resilience and recovery muscles we have because we have bounced back from other failures and it's similar muscles. Yeah, thanks for asking, Amy. I love that reflection. Yeah. So much of this conversation goes back to the fit conversation from the Atra, Rabbi Lawson's commentary. And is it okay to redefine failure as merely being a fit problem so we can more easily move forward? Yeah. Yeah, wasn't a good fit. Wasn't a good fit is concrete, it's circumstantial, it's perceived, it's identity, and could be paralysis. It could be any of those. So we're coming up at just a couple of minutes before 2 o'clock Eastern here. Anyone have any final thoughts before we move on to whatever the next event is in our day? And if not, I just want to thank Rabbi Shribman for inviting me and including me and organizing this, and for all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess if you could just, this is great for your book talk and for the topic in general. Are you available for more clients?
Absolutely. So I work with clients that are corporate. I work with synagogues, JCCs, agencies. My daughter and I do a lot of speaking together because we've written a couple of books together. So she does a lot of speaking at synagogues and like BBYO and JCCs and stuff like that. So you are welcome to find me online. You can Google SophieRiegel.com and find her online. And we'd also be happy to come together.
Great.
Yeah.
And just one more question. Do you
Yes,
offer
of
like
course.
individual coaching or counseling? Like if
Yep,
like
I do
if I was to
one-on-one
ask you, for
coaching. Yeah,
example.
I don't do counseling, but I
Yeah.
do coaching. Yes.
Okay. Great.
Thank you,
Any
my new
other,
friends.
yeah, any other questions before we? If you could just put your website in the chat, I know I
Sure.
have it. That way people can
Yep.
access it if they are interested in following up with you. And thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who came. It's always great to see you and learn from you. Just a plug for our next event. We are welcoming Rabbi Delphine Horlevier in June for a interview, a conversation. She's a rabbi from France, and we're going to learn about her experience in that country and how that can affect us as rabbis as well. So I hope to see you soon, and thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so much,
Natalie.
everyone.
Thank you,
Take
Deborah, and
care.
thank you, Natalie, for organizing such a great program.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a great rest of
So
your week.
great. Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Stop recording.